Hey there, Brainiacs. Trace here for D-News. For non-medical people, the terms vegetative state, coma, and brain dead are used interchangeably, but they are not synonymous, and there are very important distinctions. People in a vegetative state still have a functioning brain stem, meaning their body is essentially on autopilot. They can breathe on their own, have a sleep-wake cycle, and react to some stimuli, but they can't hold a conversation or take in their environment. Neurologists define consciousness by wakefulness and awareness, and people in a vegetative state.
Death isn't silence. It's the loudest signal the brain has ever transmitted. Right now, something in you already knows that. You've felt the edge of it, in a dream that felt more real than waking, in a moment of stillness so deep it frightened you. A scientist recorded exactly what happens at that threshold. He documented it. Then he disappeared from the conversation entirely. Stay with me. What's coming in the next 20 minutes will reframe everything. There is a pattern running underneath every civilization that has ever tried to map what happens when we die. Every culture, every era, every sacred tradition from the Nile to the Ganges to the highlands of Tibet. Once you see the mechanism beneath those maps, you cannot unsee it. And that is exactly what this is about. Here is what the data shows. In the final moments of cardiac arrest, the human brain does not go quiet, it ignites. Researchers have now documented what happens inside the skull during a window of roughly 900 seconds surrounding clinical death. 900 seconds. That is the most concentrated, most rigorously observed dataset on dying that science has ever produced. And what it reveals is not a system shutting down. It is a system transmitting at full power. The pattern doesn't belong to one religion or one culture. It runs beneath all of them. The Egyptians encoded it in the Book of the Dead. The Tibetans encoded it in the Bardo Thodol. The Greeks encoded it in the Eleusinian Mysteries. These weren't myths invented to comfort the grieving. They were maps, precise, technical maps of a neurological event that their practitioners had somehow already charted. And the mechanism those maps were pointing at is the same mechanism showing up now on EEG monitors in cardiac units around the world. I need you to stay with me through this entire thing, because there is a reveal coming. The story of the scientist who recorded this data, published it, and then vanished from the mainstream conversation entirely. And that reveal reframes not just what dying looks like, but why you were never taught any of this. The suppression piece comes later. And it is the part that changes the shape of everything before it. This isn't a story about death. It's a story about what you are. And once you see it that way, the flat line stops looking like an ending. Let's name the layer we're actually looking at here. The dying brain does not power down like a machine losing electricity. It spikes. In the 30 seconds before the heart stops, and the 30 seconds immediately after, something extraordinary happens inside the cerebral cortex. Gamma wave activity, the highest frequency oscillations the brain is capable of producing, surges to levels that researchers describe as explosive, not elevated, explosive. These are the same gamma oscillations associated with deep, meditative states, with vivid dreaming, with the retrieval of long-term memory. The same frequency bands, the same coherence patterns, the same signature. So ask yourself this. What does it mean when the brain's most sophisticated mode of operation activates at the precise moment the body is dying? The answer the data keeps pointing toward is this. It means the brain isn't malfunctioning. It is doing something deliberate, something it may have been designed to do at exactly that moment. Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU Langone has spent years studying resuscitation science, and his findings are some of the most documented in this field. In studies of cardiac arrest patients, approximately 40% reported some form of conscious awareness during the period when they were clinically dead. Not near death, dead. No heartbeat. No measurable brain activity by conventional standards. And yet, awareness persisted. Awareness didn't just persist. In many cases, it sharpened. Patients described perceptions of clarity, of expansion, of a quality of experience they consistently rated as more real than ordinary waking life. Now, here is the decode move. Because this is where the science and the ancient records start speaking the same language. The EEG captures electrical activity in frequency bands: delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Each band corresponds to a different mode of consciousness. Delta is deep, dreamless sleep. Theta is the hypnagogic threshold, the place between waking and dreaming where insight floods in. Alpha is relaxed awareness. Beta is ordinary focused thought. And gamma Gamma is the integrator. It is the frequency at which the brain binds separate streams of perception into a unified, coherent experience. It is the frequency of recognition, of meaning, of the moment when fragments suddenly resolve into a whole. When gamma surges at the moment of death, the brain is not fragmenting. It is integrating at maximum capacity. It is binding. It is reading something. And the question that follows from that, the question the data opens but does not close, is, what is it reading? The Tibetan Book of the Dead, compiled by Padmasambhava in the 8th century and transmitted through centuries of rigorous contemplative practice, describes the moment of death as an encounter with what it calls the clear light, a luminous, boundless awareness that arises the instant ordinary consciousness dissolves. The text doesn't frame this as metaphor. It frames it as a precise event with a precise phenomenology. Practitioners were trained, for years, sometimes decades, to recognize that light when it came, to not recoil from it, to remain stable inside it. Because the tradition held that the capacity to remain present in that moment determined everything that followed. That is not poetry. That is a training protocol, built around a neurological event. The Greeks knew a version of this too. The Eleusinian mysteries, the initiatory rites held at Eleusis for nearly 2,000 years, culminated in an experience the initiates called the epoptia, the direct vision. Aristotle wrote that initiates came to Eleusis not to learn something, but to experience something. The distinction matters enormously. Because what they were being prepared to experience, according to scholars like Walter Burkert and Karl Ruck, was a controlled encounter with the dying state, a rehearsal, a deliberate activation of the threshold the brain crosses at death, while the body remained alive. Mystery schools weren't philosophical clubs, they were laboratories. And the gamma surge wasn't a discovery they were waiting for neuroscience to confirm. It was the mechanism they had already reverse-engineered from the inside. Actually, no. Let me say that again, because this is the piece that lands differently when you really hear it. These traditions didn't stumble onto something poetic about death and dress it in ritual. They mapped a specific neurochemical event. They built entire civilizations of practice around preparing the human nervous system to navigate it consciously. The flat line wasn't the end of the map. It was the destination the map was always pointing toward. And the EEG data coming out of modern cardiac units is not contradicting those maps. It is confirming them, frequency band by frequency band. But here's what the textbooks leave out entirely. The ancients didn't just map the surge. They claimed to know what the surge was for. And that claim, the one that got buried, the one that a specific scientist documented in a specific study before disappearing from every mainstream platform, that is the layer we haven't opened yet. There is a layer beneath the neuroscience. A layer older than laboratories, older than peer review, older than the very idea of a clinical study. And once you see it, the modern data stops looking like a discovery. It starts looking like a confirmation. Here is what the ancient world knew. Death was not an ending. It was a process. A navigable, mappable, learnable process. And 3 civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all arrived at the same conclusion independently. Egypt, Tibet, Vedic, India. Each of them built what we might call an afterlife manual, not a mythology, not a collection of comforting stories for the grieving, an instruction set, a technical document for the consciousness making its exit. Let that land for a moment. The Tibetan Bardo Thodol, what the West lazily translates as the Book of the Dead, does something extraordinary. It doesn't describe death in vague, spiritual metaphors. It maps exact stages of consciousness dissolution, stage by stage. The moment the gross body releases, the moment the subtle body begins its transit, the moment the clear light of awareness arises, that blinding, total luminosity that the dying person is explicitly coached to recognize and not flee from. The text was designed to be read aloud to a dying person or to a recently deceased one as a real-time navigation guide. Lama after lama, lineage after lineage, passed this knowledge forward for over 1,000 years because it worked, because the map matched the territory. Now ask yourself this: how does a pre-scientific civilization produce a document that precise? The answer is direct transmission. Thousands of trained meditators, over centuries, deliberately practicing the dissolution of ordinary consciousness, learning to enter those liminal states while still alive and return with reports. The Bardo Thodol isn't speculation, it's accumulated field research. It's a dataset built from the inside out. Egypt ran the same operation. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, and here is the decode move you need, is not a mythology. It was never a mythology. Egyptologist, E.A. Wallace Budge spent decades translating it, and even he framed it as religious poetry. But look closer. What you actually have is a sequence of initiatory challenges mapped to specific states of awareness. The weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at isn't a fairy tale about judgment. It's a description of the consciousness encountering its own accumulated patterns. Every unresolved charge, every suppressed truth in a moment of total transparency. The 42 assessors of the Duat aren't demons. They're checkpoints, thresholds, specific states the awareness must move through and recognize without collapsing into fear or identification. This is consciousness technology, encoded in narrative, because narrative survives. Because you can carve it on a tomb wall, and it will outlast every empire that tries to bury it. Vedic India built the same map from a different angle. The Upanishads describe the dying process as the withdrawal of prana through specific channels, the progressive dissolution of the 5 sheaths of the self, and the eventual merger of individual awareness into the ground of being, what they call Brahman. The Katha Upanishad frames this entire process as a conversation between a young man named Nachiketa and Yama, the Lord of Death himself. Nachiketa doesn't beg for his life. He asks for the secret of what death actually is. And Yama, reluctantly, teaches him. Because the knowledge itself is the liberation. 3 traditions, 3 continents, 3 independently constructed maps, and they all describe the same terrain. A staged dissolution, a moment of luminous clarity, a threshold where recognition determines what happens next. That is not coincidence, that is convergence. And convergence, in any field of inquiry, is the strongest signal you have that something real is being pointed at. Here is the decode move. These documents weren't written for scholars. They weren't written for priests performing rituals at a safe ceremonial distance from actual death. They were written for the dying. They were operational. They assumed that the person reading them or having them read aloud was in the middle of the process right now and needed precise, actionable guidance to navigate it consciously, rather than being swept through it in confusion and terror. Death, in every one of these traditions, was something you could meet, something you could prepare for, something you could move through with full awareness intact. The surge we talked about earlier, that massive electromagnetic release at the threshold, the ancients didn't just observe it, they trained for it. They built entire initiatory systems designed to produce a controlled version of that surge in living practitioners, so that when the real moment came, the awareness would recognize the territory and know exactly what to do. That is not primitive superstition. That is an advanced technology of consciousness that we have systematically dismantled and replaced with nothing. But here is the question nobody in the mainstream conversation is asking. If 3 ancient civilizations independently developed this map, if the modern neuroscience is now accidentally confirming its terrain, then who decided this knowledge didn't belong in the modern world? Who looked at these documents and chose to classify them as mythology rather than mechanism? And more specifically, there was a researcher, a scientist, someone working in a credentialed institution with peer-reviewed publications and a documented methodology, someone who was assembling the modern version of this map, someone whose trail went completely cold. And that is the layer we haven't opened yet. This is the layer where the personal becomes institutional, where one researcher's documented findings run directly into a wall that shouldn't exist and then vanish behind it. Start with what the data actually shows. Consciousness persists, not metaphorically, not spiritually, measurably. Studies tracking resuscitation patients have documented coherent, structured awareness, continuing for 35 to 60 minutes into clinical death. The heart stopped, the brain flatlined by every conventional metric. And yet the awareness was present, organized, and later capable of reporting specific, verifiable details about events that occurred during that window. Details the person could not have perceived through any ordinary sensory channel. That is not an anomaly. That is a pattern. And patterns demand explanation. John Archibald Wheeler, one of the 20th century's most rigorous theoretical physicists, the man who worked directly with Einstein and later coined the term black hole, spent the final decades of his career pursuing a single question. He called it the participatory universe. His position, arrived at through decades of hard physics, was this: the observer doesn't just witness reality. the observer collapses reality into existence. Consciousness isn't a passenger in the universe. It's a constitutive element of it. Remove the observer and the wave function never resolves. The event never actually happens. What does that mean for death? It means the framework we've been using, the one where consciousness is produced by the brain and therefore ends when the brain ends, has a fundamental structural problem. Wheeler's own physics doesn't support it. Now ask the obvious question. If consciousness isn't produced by the brain, what is the brain actually doing? Here is the answer the evidence keeps pointing toward. The brain is a receiver, a tuning instrument, an extraordinarily complex biological apparatus for localizing a signal that exists independently of it. Your memories aren't recordings stored in tissue, they're constellations. Specific firing patterns across distributed networks that, when activated, reconstruct an experience. The experience itself, the felt quality of it, the awareness that is having it, that is not in the neurons. The neurons are the instrument. The music is something else. This is not fringe speculation. This is where the serious edge of neuroscience keeps arriving, uncomfortably, and then usually stepping back from because the implications are too large. Because if the brain is a receiver and not a generator, then death is not the end of the signal. It's the end of one particular receiver, and the signal continues. A researcher documented this, systematically, with methodology, with peer review, with institutional affiliation, and with the kind of measured academic language that should have guaranteed a serious hearing. The work tracked not just near-death accounts, but the specific neurological correlates of the dying process, the cascade, the surge, the coherence patterns that emerged in the moments before and after clinical death. The findings aligned with what the ancient traditions mapped. They aligned with Wheeler's participatory framework. They pointed toward a model of consciousness that the current paradigm has no comfortable place for. And then the trail went cold. Publications stopped. Institutional affiliation quietly disappeared. The work became unfindable through standard academic channels. Not retracted, retraction requires engagement. Just absent. Just gone, the way things go when the system has no category for them and no appetite to create one. Here is the decode move. This is not unprecedented. Wilhelm Reich's research into bioelectric fields was institutionally dismantled. Rupert Sheldrake's work on morphic resonance was famously described by a Nature editor as a book fit for burning, not refuted, just dismissed. The pattern is consistent. When research points toward a model of consciousness that cannot be contained within the materialist framework, the response is not rigorous counter-evidence. The response is erasure. Quiet, procedural, deniable erasure. The scientist who documented what the brain does at death didn't disappear into conspiracy. He disappeared into the gap between what the data shows and what the institution is prepared to accept. That gap is real, and it is deliberately maintained. What you do with this knowledge is the real question, because the data is out there, the ancient maps are out there, the physics is out there. The suppression itself is out there, documented in the pattern of what gets funded and what gets quietly defunded, what gets published and what gets unpublished, what gets taught and what gets classified as mythology. And there is one more layer beneath all of this, the most personal one, the one that places the instrument directly in your hands. You stop being a victim of circumstances the moment you understand what you actually are. Death isn't something happening to you. It's a process you can meet consciously. The data doesn't end fear, it ends ignorance. And ignorance was always the only thing fear needed to survive. The signal has been broadcasting the entire time. Ancient traditions mapped it. Physicists confirmed its logic. A researcher documented it and paid the price. And now you have it. Not as belief, as a working model, as a lens. If you've had a near-death experience, if you've been at that threshold and come back with something you couldn't explain, your account belongs in these comments. Seriously. This community has added layers to my understanding that no single source could. Your experience is data. Contribute it. Next, we're going into the pineal gland, the light at the moment of death, the endogenous chemistry of threshold states. That is where this map gets precise in ways you are not prepared for. The signal was always broadcasting. You just tuned in. Drop your experience below. What you've lived through matters here. And if this transmission is worth continuing, subscribe. The next frequency is already waiting. The initiation doesn't end. It deepens.